Welcome, fearfully and wonderfully made human, to another episode of the Holistic Counselor Podcast. I'm your host, Diana S. Rice from Through the Valley Therapy and blogger behind Liberation Lunas. Recently, I was browsing through YouTube when one of those shorts caught my eye. It featured Ali B. Stuckey interviewing Dr. Roger McFillin. His boldness in speaking out against the pharmaceutical industry immediately intrigued me, especially since he's in the mental health field. I decided to dig deeper and checked out his website, where I discovered the Conscious Clinician Collective. They stand for empowering clinicians to make informed, independent decisions that prioritize patient well being over profit and policy. This mission resonated with me deeply. As many of my listeners know, I began my journey in grad school back in 2001 and entered the alternative public school system in Broward County in 2004. Even then, I questioned the diagnostic and statistical manual of mental disorders, particularly how it overlooks cultural nuances. I also found myself asking, why are so many young people whose brains and bodies aren't fully developed being put on all these medications? Working with teens, I was often frustrated that the adults in charge seemed more focused on diagnosis and medication management than on the souls we were trying to help. Now, as of this year, I did transition to working exclusively online and with 18 and over. Anyway, when I read more about what the Conscious Clinician Collective was about, I signed up right away, feeling like I had finally found my tribe. For those of you who are new to my podcast, I go into detail more about this on episodes 1 and 2. So I reached out to Dr. McFillin, and boom, here he is. Roger K. McFillin, PsyD, ABPP, is a board-certified clinical psychologist and founder of the Conscious Clinician Collective. He also hosts the Radically Genuine podcast, which has propelled itself into the top 1% of global downloads and the top of the Apple podcast charts. He is one of the leading critics of the psychiatric diagnostic system, psychiatric drugs, and standard mental health care. Dr. McFillin, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Diane. It's an honor to be here. And it's great to hear that you're one of the initial members of the Conscious Clinician Collective as we're in this initial fundraising phase of the nonprofit. So really feel gratitude and feel blessed for your willingness to join, because we need as many people to join as possible to build this platform, because I think it's just so critically important.
Oh, I'm in full agreement. And that's the thing. It's like I've been feeling like this for how many years? Decades. And it's hard, though, to talk to others when they don't see it in that light, or, when you have insurance companies or you're working, because now I'm in private practice, so I'm a little more flexible in what I do, but it's also having to keep that license.
Yeah, I mean, there are systemic problems, and nothing's really going to change as long as there's a market for it and people just continue to work in the same manner that they are always taught to work, or where the rules restrict them to work. For transformative change to occur, it requires people to choose ethics as the highest standard, right? And it is. We all do really adhere to an oath, an ethical oath, and that supersedes law even. And so that's the important thing that I must share with clinicians, is that yes, we do work in a system as it exists now, but if that system creates harm, we have an ethical imperative to be able to speak out against that harm and try to take the necessary steps to prevent further harm.
Yeah. So okay. Sorry. I want to know what initially inspired you to pursue a career in mental health, and how has your vision evolved in the years?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, people ask that quite frequently, especially when you meet with a client. Sometimes, they have that opening, what questions do you have for me? And anything you want to know about who I am? They often say, well, why'd you become a psychologist? And I don't think I ever chose to be a psychologist. I think I think I was put on this earth for a specific calling. And I knew I wanted to help people. I think I started off in undergrad thinking I was going to be a teacher and a football coach. it just transformed from experiences I've had in my life, both personally and within career. My first job out of undergrad was in a children's psychiatric hospital,
Wow.
which was ages 5 to 10. And so that was my first experience to the harms of Western psychiatric care. And just the experience of being 21, 22 years old, being really naive, but really having a conscience and just asking a lot of questions about the mass drugging and sedating of children as healthcare, many of them who were coming from violent communities
Exactly.
who were victims to abuse and neglect, and for us to label them as if it's a medical condition for their behavioral uh, problems that usually manifested into hospitalizations and behavioral problems in school. To me, it was clearly obvious that you know that's and that does harm. I mean, that's an ethical violation. It doesn't make sense. This was during the biomedical revolution of psychiatry. So there were all these new drugs coming to market. So there's this mass experimentation on the brain as if the brain was really complicit in why someone might have emotional and behavioral problems. And the more I asked questions, the less I got. You realized it was just a systemic issue. The psychiatrist who was the head of the unit was kind of revered by everyone underneath them, and they just kind of
Yes.
followed along. There was this deference to authority. That was never really my personality. So, I asked, tons of questions, and I had further experiences prior to ever choosing to become a psychologist. I worked in juvenile justice. I was a juvenile probation officer. I worked in public schools, in home family therapy after I got a master's program. And what I saw was the same proliferation of the same ideas, like what you stated on this opening, is that it just turned into a fast food care medical system. As you slap a diagnosis on, like the same as if you would be diagnosing strep throat. And
Right.
it was a way of just kind of pushing pharmaceuticals to try to control behavior. And I did, eventually go into a doctoral program and research and uh, clinical work. And it just took me down the road of investigating the history of psychiatry and psychology, psychiatric diagnoses, the relationship between the pharmaceutical industry and the Western allopathic medical establishment. And,
Right.
I've been in clinical practice for, 20 some years in various capacities, but as a psychologist, close to 15 years. And the same things are clear. I mean, the more diagnoses, the more drugs, the worse we get.
Right.
And, I think 2020 was certainly a awakening for many. The veil's kind of been lifted. I think a lot of us accepted what was pushed to us in education or on the media as if it was kind of the beacon of scientific supremacy. In the United
Right.
States, it was kind of certainly, the advancement of all science. And you realize it's really a lot of pharmaceutical fraud. You realize the fraud of the trials and how these drugs were brought to market. Many of us believe the FDA keeps us safe and so forth. So it was really just having to speak out. And I did that through social media, developing the Radically Genuine podcast, and, um, to where I am now, just recently starting the nonprofit. But my full-time work is I run a large group practice here in Bethlehem,
Oh,
Pennsylvania, and
okay.
I'm a clinician. So, most of my work is directly with patients, and I'm also writing on Substack. And so it's really each day I wake up and what's my purpose? I know a lot from doing so much of the background work into the research, having so many critical conversations with academics and clinicians and medical professionals from around the globe. And so I just feel like I have a calling to have to communicate that to the general public, um, because really, if you're not if you're not informed, how can you consent? And so that's
Exactly.
kind of my purpose right now.
Well, this is what I saw too, because I come from the urban inner city background. Like I'm a product of a single mother, immigrant single mother in South Florida. So I saw, I mean, I'm in the middle of a lot of different cultures. Okay. And that's what I think was the most frustrating for me, was to see that people being diagnosed quickly. It was never like, hey, this person has an ACE score of a 9. I mean, I know that now as a therapist. I had no idea about that back in the day, right? No one talked about the adverse childhood experiences ever, especially when I was in grad school. I didn't. So to me, you're fighting against, it's like you're a salmon swimming upstream and very brave, because when I heard you speak and then I'm listening, I'm starting on episode 1, by the way, just
Wow.
because, yeah, because I really wanted to know, like, oh my gosh, somebody that's brave enough to talk about it. Because I know during COVID, when that was happening, and I was at the alternative school, and I'm the only therapist at this school, and there was a couple of hundred students there, and then we shut down, and and people were, and I'm here asking questions like, wait, what's going on? And I know about double blind studies and how long it takes. I'm probably am not as versed as you are, because I'm not into that much, but I'm not dumb either, and I had to take statistics, and I'm like, wait, something's up here. And these kids were like, it got bad. I'm sure you saw it. It got really, really bad. And then you're forced online. And then the school, I hate to put them under the bus, but they were forcing mandate. It was an alternative school, so it was charter. So they had different rules to go by. And I was the last person standing. I did not get, I'm not gonna even say the word because I have no idea. Like, but anyway, for you to understand that, um, and just how things are pushed so quickly, and it's about money or profit, right? Because I know that's part of like what I read on the Conscious Clinician Collective. I want to know more about that. Can you explain to the audience in layman terms too, like maybe for us clinicians, but I have like clients that listen to this and just regular people that have no idea and they're wanting to learn. What would you say to them about this collective?
So the Conscious Clinician Collective is my response to what has been daily emails, hundreds, if not thousands, over the past 3 or 4 years when I've been more outspoken. What I generally get from people is, where can I find someone like you? My kid or my family member or I myself are struggling, and we're concerned about multiple things. Like, what happens is they're just pushing drugs, or we're concerned about how therapists are trained. We're afraid of this kind of ideological induction, and maybe losing our kid, like really feeling like we are isolated from what happens in that therapy room. We're just looking for someone who's honest and does the work and will protect myself or my family from undue intervention. And I didn't really have an answer to this. I didn't know who to refer to. I don't have a strong trust in my field, in the tribe that I'm a part of. I mean, generally, what I see is that there's this mass production of therapists thrown out into the assembly line who are all trained under the same model. And we work in a greater medical system where we've medicalized the emotional states, and it's automatic and normal to just throw mood and mind altering drugs at people, despite the pretty significant and dramatic negative adverse health effects and the lack of any efficacy. It's just accepted. You label drugs like antidepressant, then the language is powerful. People believe we have an antidepressant drug. They believe we have repackaged sedatives are mood stabilizers. They believe the DSM is scientific, and that these conditions are discrete medical illnesses that require medical intervention. I mean, there's just a lack of basic knowledge about the limitations of all of this. And so there's so many people out there who believe what I believe, but I think they have a hard time maybe articulating it or understanding it. There's fear of stepping outside your license, the boundaries of that, because let's face it, everyone has to put food on the table for their families and for themselves, and they've invested into their education. And so I think we're at a unique time in history, and we're going to require people to kind of step outside what they've been told or what they've been taught. And so the Conscious Clinician Collective is kind of really two steps. I mean, the first part is trying to create a large platform where people can go onto the website,
Okay.
put in information around their locality, and find somebody who attested to the Conscious Clinician Compact. It's a declaration. If anyone goes to thecccollective.org, you can read that declaration. Really, I think it's quite reasonable.
Yes.
It's quite scientific based, and it's of a high ethical standard. And informed consent and medical freedom are legal and ethical imperatives that we have to demand, because if we don't demand them, we don't receive them. And that's kind of what's going on. Most therapists don't have enough information to provide informed consent. Psychiatry and primary care certainly do not have enough information to provide informed consent. They're really exaggerating any benefits to these drugs, and they're misrepresenting and minimizing the severe harms. And in fact, the iatrogenic harms of drugs are often misrepresented as worsening mental illness. And so people get
Mm,
stuck in the system. You get on the drugs, you take what is often an episodic condition in response to stressful events, normal and expected, and it becomes a chronic illness. And now you even self identify with these diagnoses. You become a patient for life because there's really no escape from it. You don't go into the mental health system and really improve. You actually manage your condition. And that's kind of what's communicated by the medical establishment. And the pharmaceutical companies are beholden to their shareholders. I mean, they're not beholden to your health. They do better the sicker you are, the sicker we are. And so it's about creating customers for life. And so I'm looking for people to join this movement. So the first part is, you join, and, we'll get you up on our website when we have enough money to create it.
yeah.
And, people can search. They can trust that you're going to reach a high ethical standard. This isn't just mental health clinicians. This is all healthcare clinicians. And
Ah,
a lot of them are
okay.
leaving in mass droves, right? You go into
Right.
the allopathic medical environment, they're just drugging symptoms. A lot of people have legitimate healthcare conditions that, manifest themselves as psychiatric conditions, whether
Right.
it's hormonal conditions, um, or other medical conditions that are, just then because they have mood or anxiety related symptoms associated with those medical conditions, they're also mislabeled and misrepresented. And then the
Yeah.
second part of it was just to build that platform where people can access information, right? So you can understand what are the alternatives. If informed consent is you are provided the risks, the benefits of any medical intervention, as well as alternatives, well, we know no one's getting that. So where can people get accurate information? And we need platforms where people can easily access it. Then, so that's kind of ultimately the vision.
Okay. So the goal would be like a directory per se,
The
like you
first
go
part,
in. Okay.
yeah, the
Because
first
there's so,
part.
all right. So that's okay. That's wonderful. And it's for all medical and anybody licensed. I mean, can you explain it a little more? Would it be like for health coaches too, or you know what I mean, or chiropractors, or can you just
Mhm.
explain it a little more? Or is it someone that has to have that license like in Western medicine? I don't know how else to put it.
No, I mean, in fact, I want to engage those who are more alternative healthcare practitioners,
Oh,
right?
good
I
to
mean,
know.
because when you talk about informed consent, what are the alternatives? I mean, there's just all this supportive research that is kind of left out of the mainstream, whether it was naturopaths or, other approaches to medicine that are
Hmm.
outside of Western allopathic medicine. And chiropractic is another good example of that. But so are, more Eastern philosophies and so forth that,
Like
have
acupuncture
like
and
acupuncture. I mean,
wonderful.
they have centuries
Yeah.
of
Thousands
positive
of years.
response. Yeah.
Yes.
And I don't know if people truly realize how, I mean, our scientific the scientific knowledge of most people is low, right? We require trust into a medical authority. And right now in mental health, 85% of drugs are prescribed in primary care by doctors who have no specialties in this area. So yeah, we need to have the medical professionals who are questioning things in the same way that many of us are questioning to be part of this collective. And medical professionals are critically important in our culture and society. So yeah, we're trying to engage all those people.
Oh, wonderful. Good to know. I am part of a holistic business network, and I think they're becoming national. We just had a meeting yesterday, and I'm going to pass this on definitely because I did not know. At first I thought might have been just for in the mental health field, but now I'm seeing this is a broad. You started something really big, man. That calling you have on your life, like wow.
Well,
Okay.
yeah, it requires all of us to be
together.
able to take that step out, right? Like it's only kind of a Western idea that mental health and physical health are separated from each other,
For
So
real.
like ultimately our spiritual health, our medical health, our physical health, our mental health, they're all one.
Right.
But we're in this age where, there's all these specialties as if the body and the mind work separate from each other, like
Right.
parts of a
Yeah.
car. It's kind of odd when you think about it.
Yeah, for sure. That's one thing I say to my client or my new clients is like, I want to understand your biology, your psychology, and your theology.
Yeah.
And how to help you in all those ways so you balance. Okay, so can we talk a little bit about the science? Because that's one thing when I heard that trust the science, and then I'm like, I'm trying to look into the science, but it's not clear and so I know you've done a lot of research, and I would love the audience to hear about like the DSM and just what you know about the pharmaceutical and everything. It's just it's so weird. I'm already at that nervous place because I'm speaking out with you, and it's like, oh, but medicine has its place. Like we always have to say that medicine has its, but because truly I believe it does. But then there's a placebo effect and the nocebo effect, and there's so much out there. So whatever you want to share with the audience, please do.
Yeah, I mean, what's challenging for most people who want to do research, what that means is Google search. And a Google search is that you are kind of just entering into the matrix or the paradigm of misinformation. The How something becomes visible on the first one or two pages of a Google search is really based on money and website optimization. So people think they're doing research when they're really just being exposed to the propaganda about what is health. Let's see. I mean, I don't. It's a very broad question that you asked. So, like systemically, I call it the sick care system, not the healthcare system. And I'm very careful of using the word medicine when medicine isn't present. So, medicine is really, it refers to something that is medicinal. And so, what is medicinal? I mean, medicinal is a lot of the things we do that keep us out of the doctor's office, right?
Right.
Doctors in Western culture are treating symptoms, but health is something different. I mean, that health is plants and food and what you put into your body and your nutrients and your sun exposure and your sleep and your exercise and your spiritual health and your engagement and purpose in the community and so forth. Of course, there's a place for medical interventions, but what we're really good at in Western culture is fixing things that are broke, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
maybe we're good at emergency medicine or fixing broken bones, orthopedic, and so forth. But that doesn't really help people live well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all available evidence that say the more time you spend in the doctor's office, the worse you're going to be. It's not just the drugs they're providing, it's also the ideas of sickness, right? And there's so much misrepresented science that exists out there that are industry funded. And so that's from big food, that's from big pharma. And so it is a sick care system and it's going to feed off itself. And you go into the sick care system, you're going to get sick ideas, you're going to get wrong ideas, right? I think the greatest example of that is around cholesterol and trying to associate that with heart disease, or how there was a war on saturated fat, which was pushed by the sugar industry, which has created widespread sickness and disease and obesity. And now we sell obesity drugs. I mean, it's just, if you're not awake to that now, I don't know if I'm going to ever awaken you to that because it's
Right.
so clear we're sicker and we're sicker.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just not what health is. Health is restoring a balance in the body of mind, body, spirit, purpose, activity. When it comes to psychiatric care, I mean, that's probably the worst of it. Trying to see an emotion as a symptom instead of understanding it's a extremely valuable transformative message that we need to learn to pay attention to help
Yes.
foster change. That doesn't deny the biology of this. It's just not the biology in which it's pushed from our medical system. So, like when people say, well, isn't our physical health and our biology instrumental in how we feel emotional. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, from the food we put into our body, there are common nutrient deficiencies that manifest themselves as anxiety and mood. But that's again another transformative indication that you need to do something different with your health.
Right.
Lack of sun exposure and lack of vitamin D has a number of widespread effects on our emotional and behavioral health.
Right.
In the American population, for example, it's about 50% of people are magnesium deficient. And when you're magnesium deficient, that's going to manifest itself in anxiety. Gut health is so critically important. In no way should we be talking about mental health as related to brain conditions. I mean, that's such an abandoned area of science.
Mm.
Uh, Genetics, people probably don't even understand this, but like there's no money in it anymore. Like they don't even fund it because there has never been able to identify any correlation with brain neurochemicals and uh, behavioral disorders. And what the DSM has done is it's really become a moneymaker for the APA, which is the American Psychiatric Association, and a way to keep people in the sick care system by using categorical diagnoses to try to label every aspect of the human experience and to medicalize it. You can't sell drugs for setbacks in life. You can't sell drugs for uh, grief or loss or anything that. You can only do it for medical conditions. So, uh, depression and the way that it's communicated in Western societies is a constructed version of it to sell drugs.
Mm.
And so the DSM has no scientific validity. It really kind of has developed from, key academics who sat around the table to try to categorize it. Maybe the
Right.
intentions initially were to be part of a greater medical system for insurance to be used. But the truth of the matter is, it's got misrepresented since then, and it's communicated that these are medical conditions. And of
Hmm.
course, you have indoctrinated medical professionals who've been exposed to that medical education that's funded by the pharmaceutical industry to kind of just continue with these messages. I mean, you and I could talk for 6 hours on what the sick care system is, but
Yes.
I think I don't think I can awaken anyone else to the obvious. I mean, if you don't see the obvious as it exists right now, I'm probably not going to make much of a difference in trying
Right.
to communicate to you why we're all sick, why we're a sick culture, physically, mentally, and emotionally. We have over 20% of our population on psychiatric drugs. We have 60% of our population's obese. Over 60% of the people are popping some pharmaceutical. And these aren't
Right.
medicines. These are chemical compounds that are created in a factory.
Mm.
Medicines, we have to reserve the right for medicines when we're actually correcting something or healing something. And
Right.
so language is powerful, and we've lost that in our culture.
Yeah. So, what would you do with a patient or client? I don't like calling them patients, but clients that would come in with, and they hear you, right? And they're like needing change. And what would be practical steps for them to be able to start the change? Because you're right. This is a construct that we all believe. I believed it back in the day until I realized what was happening with my own health, my own physical, mental health. And then I started questioning and questioning and questioning. And, I mean, I have a functional integrative doctor now who understands East and West and brings it together and does a lot of testing and all that. But I'm also talking about mental health because here's an example. A teenager came in and I realized after listening to him, he was up all night and then he was smoking pot, right? Teenage stuff. And the marijuana nowadays is not the marijuana we grew up in the 80s. Okay. So you're up all night. And so he started going into psychosis,
Mhm.
ends up in the psych ward for 2 weeks. Mom has no idea what to do. And he's now on like 4 different medications.
Yeah. Well, that's just bad medicine. Um, Listen, that's a drug-induced psychosis, which a lot, there's a high percentage of the psychotic episodes are
Mm-hmm.
drug-induced.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just I mean, that's bad medical care. I mean, that's clearly identifiable uh, that cannabis creates psychosis for a percentage of people, much higher rates for teenagers. The association is really, really clear. And then you made the point. That client doesn't really know what they're ingesting.
Right.
So we don't know what that kid ingested because of the quality of the cannabis and or what else is mixed in that. And so that needed to be viewed as a medical condition that was drug induced, and there needed to be not added more drugs that actually increased the likelihood that he'll experience psychosis. I mean, that's just the insanity of this. And
Hmm.
so when we have bad care, right? Like, and all that is bad care, you're going to have bad results.
Yeah. Well, he ended up like coming to me, and then we found a functional psychiatrist, and then
Not
little
many
by
of them.
little, no, there isn't. But I am finding my own little tribe down here that are psychiatric nurses that are, I mean, I have like two or three I could count on, and they go in. Oh, and the Amen Clinic, they opened one here in Hollywood, Dr. Daniel Amen. And so, he's into the integrative stuff more than anyone else I've known, and that's helped a lot as well. So to me, like someone's listening and they are on a bunch of different, they have anxiety and depression, because that's what I say, they're symptoms, right? They're not, we have to get to the root cause of it. What would you do? Like what can, where can someone start? What, I know they have to become their own advocate, but when you're highly depressed or highly anxious, you feel stuck, fight, flight, fear, or freeze or fawn. So what would you say to someone?
Well, this is why informed consent is so important. I never start working with somebody until they're provided informed consent. And the best kind of medical care, the best kind of therapy, psychological care is you have to remove the poisons first. Uh,
Mm,
Most of a lot of the people that are coming into my center here, and we have a staff that's highly educated on this, a thorough history and evaluation of how the treatment that has been provided has worsened their condition, and then thorough education on what are the common adverse effects of these drugs. And I rarely even see someone on one drug anymore. Most
right.
people are on minimum of three. And so we're working with slowly and safely tapering them off their drugs, which creates dramatic improvement. We move away from the label, I'm depressed or anxious, and instead we learn, I feel this when this has happened, and I responded to this in this way. And so just like in a functional medicine practitioner would try to understand the origins and roots, then the functions of their body's response. I mean, really effective mental health care is doing the same thing. To live means to experience suffering and pain, right? Like so,
Yeah.
every single it's a strange time that we're living in where people say I have anxiety, like they have bronchitis or something. Like, well, anxiety is a natural human experience, right? Everyone has anxiety.
Yes.
How you respond to the anxiety can certainly exacerbate it, intensify it, and create an inner world where everything is so scary and overwhelming and you don't trust your ability to cope with it. But that gives us, an avenue for effective help and
Mhm.
facing your fears. It's part of this life. We have to face our fears and overcome them. We throw a label of depression has lost its value. It's just an umbrella term for sadness and anxiety and struggle and loneliness and boredom. As a clinical psychologist, and severe depression exists, and I've certainly been exposed to that and treated and worked with it throughout my career. But what we're seeing now is, I'll work with a 18 or 19-year-old or 20-year-old, and they'll sit down and say, my depression came back this weekend.
Mm,
You know, when really they've lacked, they've lost the language of suffering. Like they can't say that I was sad and lonely this weekend,
right.
right? As if that's depression, right? And it's comes outside of them and they're inflicted by it. Like they've caught a disease.
Right.
And that is the consequences of like how we've articulated this and how we've trained mental health professionals and what we've done with our popular culture. I mean, we're pushed these ideas through media. We're exposed to direct pharma marketing. And so we have a brainwashed generation, multiple generations at this point. So yes, education, it starts with education.
Hmm.
And a lot of people just get better when they're educated and you remove the poisons and you help them cope with the original problems that brought them in to see the doctor in the first place. And I think
Right.
most people get better in that regard.
Okay. So what about in the DSM, you have DID, dissociative identity disorder, you have schizophrenia, you have um, things like diagnosis like that, where somebody comes in with multiple personalities or schizophrenia. How would you treat a client like that?
Well, first of all, I don't believe there's a scientifically sound identification of DID.
Okay.
I think that's more cultural myth than anything. And I've never met uh, any practitioner who's really faced that in clinical practice. Disassociation exists
Okay.
for various functions. Let's put that to the side. I don't
Mm-hmm.
treat schizophrenia.
Mm.
Um, Schizophrenia in its truest form is a rare condition, which I think the way in which we treat it probably makes it worse. And so there's evidence of psychosis in its form that exists globally, right? And cultures respond to psychosis in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm never going to treat schizophrenia as a condition. It's not my areas of expertise as a clinical psychologist. There's no therapy necessarily for schizophrenia. And what happens is people who work with someone who is schizophrenic just works with it in the Western model. It's just some supportive therapy and, take your drugs. But
Mm-hmm.
we know the drugs worsen the condition in the long run. They're probably part of the condition. We know the best outcomes tend to be people who've had first psychotic episodes, and then are placed in environments that are connected to nature,
Mm-hmm.
that are supportive, that there's a focus on rest, restoration, and good food. And these type of interventions that exist, not much so in the United States, but in other countries, have yielded much better long-term outcomes. And, we see it as a chronic illness in the United States because that's how we treat it. It becomes chronic. When we think about it, we tend to think about the homeless person on the street who's talking to themselves, and we label it schizophrenia. But
Mm-hmm.
again, we really don't know the origins of that. Is that
Right.
drug? Is that drug abuse? Is that a history of real severe trauma?
Yeah.
How has that affected the brain? What is the brain and its exposure to toxins and nutrient deficiencies and starvation and drugs? And how does that present itself? We label it schizophrenia. We label it as a medical condition, but we literally know nothing about it. And so it's not like we have this strong medical response that supports people with schizophrenia. And as long as you take your antipsychotic drugs, well, then you're stable and you're fine. No, those drugs create metabolic illness. Um, if you've ever seen what the care looks like for people who are housed with schizophrenia, they're obese, they're overweight, they shuffle around, they're sedated. And it's not care. That's not medical care. That's not
Right.
treatment. But again, I mean, that's not most of the problems that we're facing here in the United States. When we call mental health problems, it's not like we have this widespread epidemic of schizophrenia. We have this widespread epidemic of uh, just mood and anxiety conditions
Yeah.
that have affected the general population of this country in ways that we've never seen before. We have these epidemics of eating disorders. We have this epidemic of self-injury. We have increased suicidality. We have people labeling themselves as ADHD. We have metabolic illness and sickness. It's just a general large scale sick culture. And we've separated it in terms of mental health, but I mean, we're physically not doing well. And of course, look where we are in just world history. I mean, our exposure to news, our exposure to social media. I mean, we live in a
Yes.
toxic culture, and
Yes.
so we should not be shocked when we feel sick.
Yeah. No, it's true. And so how do we not feel sick is the question. How do we I mean, I know because this is what I teach. It's psychoeducational, really. I have clients that come in and they really are into their label, and it's like slowly and surely giving them a safe space to be themselves and really go into what is hurting them, right? It's and then working a plan with them to holistically, you know. But there's so many people though, especially in my culture around me, and they can't afford good quality therapy. They just can't. Like, they're on And that's what I think breaks my heart was that. And I'm like trying to figure out because a lot of them will listen to my program because I am a BIPOC therapist and I want to help my people. I want to help all people, not just my people, but you see what I mean? Like they don't have that education. And you hit it. It's like starts with the food. Well, I can't afford the food. Well, you can't afford not to eat healthy or figure that out. Like I tried to teach those things. So what is the approach in your center about that? Like, how do you do it holistically? You said you probably have a full assessment, right? Do you ask about nutrition? Do you ask about sleep? Do you ask? I mean, I even, it sounds weird, but I even asked, like, how are you going to the bathroom? Like, how's your poop? And they're like, what? No one in the mental health field has ever asked me that. I'm like, because your whole entire system is all related together, mind, body, and soul. So what do you do or suggest to, help those that think that they can't afford or like where to go or where to start?
Yeah, I think first thing is that, of course, you're referring to all the things that impact how we live. So, how does someone sleep? You're talking about their gut health. When you're talking about bowel movements and all those things, you're talking about the quality of their gut health. You're taking a look at what goes into their bodies. I think it's a misnomer that you can't afford good food. There's been research studies on this. Yes, the packaged processed foods are cheaper, but you tend to eat a lot more of them,
Mm.
and then you're exposed to a lot more health consequences of it. So I've had Dr. Christopher Palmer, who's from Harvard Medical School, Georgia Eady, who've done the research on the ketogenic diet.
Mhm.
And so, if metabolic illness is a factor in schizophrenia, because some of the work that they're doing is they're getting their schizophrenic and chronic bipolar clients off all the drugs, and they're implementing the keto diet, which is high fat and high protein, and they're restoring health and those symptoms are decreasing. Having ground beef and just some chicken could cost is more cost effective than eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, two snacks from boxes or fast food that are laden with seed oils, industrial based seed oils, which create inflammation.
Mhm.
Um, Not to mention all the sugars and the cost in that manner. I mean, it's cheaper to eat that way. It's cheaper for medical bills. It's a higher cost of living. Or I mean, it's a lower cost of living. Taking out the sugary drinks. Uh, you know, just water and salt. So this goes back to education, right? Those things are really, really important. When we talk about quality of sleep, that's exposure to light. Even those who are impoverished have cell phones, and I'm looking at the amount of screen time that people have. I mean, when you're have 8 to 12 hours staring in this phone, how is that going to impact your health? How is it going to impact your sleep? How is it going to impact your attention? So there's
Mhm.
all these things that are critically important. Are you up all night, sleeping all day? What's your activity level? I mean, these are the things that are much more important than any talk therapy, to be honest with you. Making changes in those aspects will have much more robust positive health outcomes. Now, if there's a therapy that can facilitate that, as
Yeah.
like you're part of the healthcare system, then that's great. But most therapies aren't that. So my idea of good therapy is a little bit different. It's short term, generally
Mhm.
speaking. It's removing the poisons. It's changing life. It's changing behavior. It's education, and it's getting them to face and solve problems and to get out of the brainwashing that exists in our culture. And I think that's what good therapy is.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when they come in, I'm like, what's the narrative that you're believing right now and how are we going to change it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and to try to get them to understand, to empower them because they have felt they've lost their power. I mean, I've had clients that 30 years old come in and they were Baker at a teenager. And then they come from very abusive households, but they didn't know that that's not normal. And so oh, my life is fine. I'm like, okay, why are you in my office then? And then we go slowly and surely. And try to figure out to empower them to a point of, no, I have advocacy. I'm able to have my own critical thinking skills. I'm not going to let that go anymore to everybody else. And honestly, because I am a faith-based therapist, I try to start where, like, who do you think God says you are? And they're just like, what? Because sometimes, back now I'm in private practice, I'm allowed to do those things. But in the schools, I would just ask them question over question over question. It was, and then listen, and they would get better because they were like, I have a brain. And deal with the anger and stuff. What do you think of somatic therapy? Like the movement of the energy coming out when you have everything bottled up or built in like that.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to describe to me exactly what somatic therapy means to you, and but if you're saying about like the movement of the body and seeing us as energetic beings,
Mm-hmm.
and energy in itself needs to flow, and emotions themselves too are energy in motion, and thoughts are energy, and then I'm right there with you. Critical, important pieces of sound health, right? Not just mental health, physical health.
Right, right. Okay. So, with the collective focusing on empowering individuals with science-based information, how do you balance the scientific rigor with respect for personal autonomy, especially in an era where trust in science can be polarized? Because honestly, like, I realize I'm not a very political person. I'm not. I don't. I like to just focus on Jesus Christ, honestly. And I have people from all walks of life. I'm telling you right now, like from different countries, from different left to right. I mean, I'm like, all right, Lord, they're coming in. Let me help them. Um, but that whole follow the science thing, everything has become so political, and we are now in a political season, right? Coming in once again. And so with the collective, how do you know, balance that, the scientific rigor and the
Well,
respect for
well,
personal
well,
autonomy?
science is a process. It's not something we trust. So that's just a line that was thrown at all of us, right? Where
Mm,
public health authorities could say, "I am the God, I am the authority. Trust what I say." That's not what science is. Science is a process that is empirical, and everyone is an N of one, right? So there's a global or general sense of like emerging scientific evidence across fields, and then there's what's provided to us in media or on a Google search.
mm,
So to me, we need to embrace science as an empirical process. And so that means that if we're not going to be empirically evaluating whether something is effective or works or not, then what are we going to be doing? We're only going to be blindly following an authority. Science is there to protect us, right? So
mm,
if you go on an antidepressant, quote unquote, marketing term, and you're severely depressed, that is a scientific empirical process. I started this, I still feel and experience this, right? So that drug has not led to any positive changes. But yet, if you don't trust an empirical process, what people do is they succumb to brainwashing. My doctor told me I'd be worse without it, right? So it is ultimately a respect for people's bodily autonomy, their medical freedom, by being able to have a process to assess, analyze, and measure any improvements. So you can try a ketogenic diet for severe depression and metabolic illness.
mm-hmm,
Um, but you'd have to measure your outcomes. Is there a loss of weight? Is there improvement in blood pressure? Are they no longer pre-diabetic? Right. So that's what science is. And there's a science base for lots of things, right? There's a science base in alternative medicines. There's a science base in psychotherapy. There's a science base in clinical psychology. There's a science base that they push out for you in psychiatry, right? But if we're scientifically illiterate, we won't necessarily know what that means. So, uh, for example, SSRIs, which are antidepressants, were brought to market. You only need two positive clinical trials to bring something to market. That means you can, go through 15 clinical trials and find two that had only a statistical difference between that and the placebo effect, and you can publish it, you can push it onto market, and you can sell it to your medical professionals, and medical professionals can believe that that's a evidence-based treatment. But if you're
Mm.
scientifically illiterate, you don't really know what that means. You don't
Right.
understand that the totality of the evidence doesn't demonstrate that an SSRI is effective. You don't understand that just because something is statistically significant over a placebo doesn't mean it's clinically relevant. So if we remain scientifically illiterate, how do people consent? So that's why I think it's an important piece to have on the Conscious Clinician Collective, because people have to be taught on what a drug is and what it isn't,
Right.
what psychotherapy is and what it isn't, what
Yes.
healthcare interventions are and what they are not,
Right.
and trust people to make the best decisions for themselves in their life journey. It is their lives. We give them information, we give them options, and they choose their course. Here's what I can provide, here's what I can't provide, here's what I can promise, here's what I can't promise.
Hmm.
Right. And then you agree together to do it scientifically.
Mm.
So, yeah, if you just accept the media driven narrative about what science is, and then you enter into, exactly where we are right now, it just becomes a political force for more argument.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, I probably, yeah, you're right. I could talk to you about so many different things that pop into my head because, like, to find someone that's like-minded is rare, and I'm so appreciative. Um, are there any final practical tips or words of encouragement you would like to leave the audience with?
Oh boy. Um, well, first of all, I do believe that everyone's life has incredible purpose. There's a soul's journey that we're all on. And within that soul's journey is going to be a number of challenges that are going to arise in your life. And they're meant to be there, in my opinion. That's the spiritual aspect of my
Mm.
life. And just because you struggle with what we're labeling as depression or anxiety doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It means there's something right with you, right? And you want to be able to pay attention to what that means for you, because it's a challenge that you're going to have to face, right? Like light and the dark exist together, and uh, the light always shines through every crack in the dark. And so even in dark periods of our lives, they're temporary and they're there for us to face things. I think if we look at things through the Western medicine model, then we see those challenges or those dark times as if there's something wrong with us, like there's
Mm.
something wrong with our brain, like there's something wrong with who we are. We're ill, we're mentally ill. And all those labels, we have to be able to transform past them.
Yeah.
And we have to, I think, really change the way that we communicate what it means to be a human being in a life. So that's a return of stories. That's a return of uh, our collective language of suffering. It's normalization of struggle. It's supporting each other in that process, and to really get out of the brainwashing that really has taken place over much of our lifetimes.
Yeah. And so, where can the listener find you?
So you can go to my website, which is drmcfillin.com. And on there, you can sign up for my Substack, which is drmcfillin.substack.com. I am on really two major social media platforms. One is X, which is where I'm probably most frequently posting, and that's at Dr. McFillin. I'm also on Instagram at Radically Genuine. So that supports my podcast. You'll see clips from my podcast and just various ways of trying to kind of communicate important messages that are part of what my purpose is now. Radically Genuine Podcast, you can download that from any major platform. And I also post the video portion on Substack. So I'm
Hmm.
writing on Substack, posting my podcast on Substack. And of course, very early stages of the Conscious Clinician Collective, the cccollective.org. We really do need support. If you're a healthcare practitioner or a clinician, please consider joining. If you just believe in the mission, we need donations. They're all tax deductible. Um, and so we're really hoping to kind of build a movement And that's really what this is. It really is a healthcare, mental health care movement that we're trying to get as many people on board as possible.
I love that. I will put all of that, excuse me, in the show notes. So thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. It's been an honor. And remember, dear one, to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.